Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? It's Matt here from YoVideogames. Over the years, if you've been watching the channel or our live streams, you might have noticed my strange affinity for the character of Ganondorf, especially regarding Smash Bros. Well, it's not because I like tank characters or slow grapplers. In fact, it's quite the opposite in just about every other fighting game. The reason I have Ganondorf as my main character in Smash Bros. Comes down completely to my love for the character, even if he's the worst player in the game. But why Ganondorf? What's so special about an ugly green dude that turns into a pig? For that, we need to go into his history a bit and also look toward the future. Also, beware of spoilers for the Zelda series, guys, including Breath of the Wild. Okay, so originally Ganondorf wasn't really anything more than a means to an end. A final boss you must fight to save the princess and save Hyrule. It was the 8-bit era after all, which was totally fine. Also, totally underwhelming to pull the same shit in 2017, Nintendo. His first real backstory would come in 1991 with the release of A Link to the Past. Like most video games in the 80s and early 90s, most of the backstory and lore was in the instruction manual. In fact, Nintendo even hired a film student major and had his first job be to just write the backstory in the instruction manual. Yoshiaki Koizumi was his name, and he would go on to leave his mark on the series and raise the storytelling bar far out of the reach of the current day staff. With the instruction manual, we learned Ganondorf was once a man, that he lived amongst a gang of thieves, and how he came into the possession of the Triforce. While nothing deep or really all that fascinating, it did leave some tantalizing space to work with, character-wise, going forward, or back if you try to follow the timeline. With Ocarina of Time, Nintendo moved the series into 3D, and ironically enough, it started to do that with the characters ever so much. Now, I'm not going to try to claim that anyone in Ocarina of Time had depth, really, but it did show a much livelier side to the characters and NPCs and their dialogue. The designers of Ocarina of Time even have spoken about the process of making a human character over the previously pig monster only, and how they made him have shades of a cool and charismatic guy, rather than a twisted and ugly thief. After all, the story does have him initially forming an alliance with the King of Hyrule. Still, this really doesn't constitute depth to his character, but the devil is in the details. Details that were later revealed by Yoshiaki Koizumi that had to be hidden on purpose from Shigeru Miyamoto due to his dislike of text in games. It's these details that are fascinating. We learned that prior to the game there was a great unification war across Hyrule, and that part of that unification was the handing of sacred stones to the Goron, Zora, and the Kokiri tribe. Curiously enough, the one race that had no connection at the start of the game was the Gerudo tribe from the desert. This would obviously imply that they were not on the winning side of the war, and furthermore, what is presented of them in-game is that of a tribe comprised of thieves living on the edge of a haunted wasteland. Going back again to Ganondorf's role, we see early on in the game him making an alliance with the King of Hyrule, which was an obvious ploy by him to get close to the royal family, and ultimately into the Sacred Realm, which holds the Triforce. Again, not a lot of depth, but we do see that Ganondorf was raised in a desert. His tribe was on the losing side of a war, a tribe that was feared and shunned by Hyrule, and that he was raised by two witches of the tribe, Kumi and Kotaki, who excelled in dark magic and were a boss late in the game. Even though it doesn't explicitly state it, we know Ganondorf's life and living conditions were pretty harsh. Luckily, the next game to feature Ganondorf would take this idea and run with it. In Wind Waker, Yoshiaki Koizumi's last Zelda title, we got a whole lot more dialogue from Ganondorf than ever before, or since. This was not a game where you hear about the big baddie doing something bad in the past and then see him for the first time at the end of the game. Nor is this a game where the bad guy is pulling the strings from another, like Twilight Princess, and it's certainly not a game where the bad guy is just a big purple fart cloud that solidifies into a bug. Wind Waker was more than anything else a Ganondorf game. I think even Nintendo saw this, and with Wind Waker HD, they were bundling statues of Ganondorf with the collector's edition of the game. While you fight Phantom Ganon and Puppet Ganons in the game, Ganondorf himself never transforms into a beast, and more importantly, stays a central figure throughout the title. The story of Wind Waker is that of a humbled villain. He got what he wanted in Ocarina of Time, but was ultimately sealed away in the Sacred Realm by the other two wielders of the Triforce that split when he acquired the Triforce of Power in Ocarina of Time. as well as the 7 sages. After breaking free of his imprisonment and without a hero to stop him, the goddesses then flooded the land of Hyrule, leaving its survivors to live amongst the remaining small islands. Ganondorf is no longer a power-crazed beast, but rather a villain seeking to return Hyrule to its former glory against the rulings of the goddesses. His actions in Wind Waker are strangely calmer than before, again, easily chalked up to being a humbled villain. In a cutscene near the end of the game, we see he has captured Zelda, but rather than put her in some jail cell, he has her sleeping on a giant bed. When Link enters, he describes her dreams of lifeless ocean stretching forever on. He then tells Link that his gods destroyed his world, which is some pretty understandable resentment. Upon meeting him shortly thereafter, we get the defining moment in Ganondorf's character. Atop Hyrule Castle, Ganondorf laments his life and events that transpire that have brought everything here. He describes his country in the Gerudo Desert, how the winds of the day brought scorching heat and those of the night bringing a frigid gale, and in the end they both brought the same thing: death. But the winds of Hyrule brought something other than death and ruin, and he coveted that. He even tells Link that he has no desire to kill him, but rather just needs the Triforce of Courage within him. Hardly the empty blank evil that Breath of the Wild presents. Ganondorf's wish is to burn away the ocean and restore Hyrule to him. As a player, I couldn't be more on his side. Fuck the game-ruining ocean. But, of course, the actions of the good Daphne Snow Hansen fuck-up Hyrule make it so that we get a terrible DS sequel with more sailing. This is probably what solidified the character of Ganondorf as a personal favorite of mine. He is evil, but he is also a product of his environment and upbringing, born into a life of oppression and desperation, forced to scrounge and steal to survive, raised by a pair of twisted witches, and when he obtained that which he sought most, he was imprisoned for it. And even after overcoming all of this, the forces of the goddesses destroyed the world he sought. He's a pretty understandable asshole, even if he is making the wrong choices. Things change for the worse when Koizumi leaves the Zelda team, sadly. With Twilight Princess, we go to a different timeline where Ganondorf is not humbled. And in fact, when he's captured early on and tried to be executed, he finds he already has the Triforce of Power, and with this becomes even more of an arrogant asshole. Now, this is a weaker character arc from Wind Waker for sure, but it does make a bit of logical sense in the continuity of events that led to Twilight Princess versus Wind Waker. So, it's passable, and he's never looked cooler than in Twilight Princess. Sadly, it just goes further and further downhill from there, leaving us with the dialogue-less fart cloud of Breath of the Wild. Before that though, Aonuma and his infinite wisdom made Hidemaru Fujibayashi, formerly of Capcom's flagship and director of the Oracle games in Minish Cap, the director of the next major console titles. He told former Nintendo president in an interview that he took a sick day from work and wrote the entire script for Skyward Sword in a day, and boy does it show. Not only does Skyward Sword directly contradict the years-long canon that Koizumi created in 1991 and had been followed ever since, it also attempts to seemingly character assassinate Ganondorf by implying that he's a reincarnation of Demise's hatred. Who is Demise? The leader of the demons that one day sprang out of the ground to wreak havoc on the world. This is another good reason why I fucking despise Skyward Sword so much. It tries to retcon all of the world building of the previous games, and worst of all, takes away decades of character growth on the series' signature villain. Fujibayashi is a god-awful writer and barely a half-decent director at best. My earnest wish is that he loses his job in the game industry forever. But like Ganondorf, my wish is taken from me over and over again. Despite all this, I'm okay with ignoring Skyward Sword in every way. It added nothing good to the series and was a chore to play most of the time. It's the epitome of everything that had gone wrong with the Zelda series up to that point, and despite some early accolades, it seems they learned their lesson on gameplay with Breath of the Wild, and how it's almost a complete 180 from it in every way except story. At least the minimalist approach to the storytelling in Breath of the Wild makes it totally non-offensive, and being set so far in the future also avoids it ruining any more of Koizumi and others' work and efforts in the past. However, I still can't accurately express how utterly disappointing Ganon is in the game, from both a gameplay and story perspective. Twilight Princess may have felt like it shoehorned Ganondorf into the game, but at least the last battle was spectacular fan service, and Breath of the Wild, it's an afterthought. Going forward, I don't expect much from the character of Ganondorf from Nintendo. it's pretty clear they don't really know what to do with him. The best case scenario for me would be to stop using him. He's officially dead in every timeline. They don't need to bring him back anymore, especially if it's going to be a fart cloud bug. I'd be much more excited if they tried to introduce new villains to the series, so long as they aren't stupid characters like Girahim. But considering who they keep putting in charge, that's probably what we will keep getting. In the meantime, I'm going to keep picking Ganondorf in Smash Bros., and I'm going to keep loving the original story Koizumi and the former staff came up with. That's why I love Ganondorf. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you on the channel. Later, dudes!